Australian native plants and animals adapted to live on an isolated continent over millions of years. That's why the nature of Australia is very unusual. 90% of species don't exist in other parts of the world. The first Europeans said the land where the animals don't run, but jump. When I was making my project Australian Animals, I found some facts about rabbits that became a real disaster. Now I want to tell about many other introduced animals. So, what does introduced species mean? Introduced or alien species are non-native species, which are unusual for the area where they have been brought. For example, these nasty rats, we can see them digging in litter, hear them rustling and squeaking under the floors of our country houses. But does everyone know they are real introduced animals? Yes, they were the passengers of the ships of the crusaders that sailed back from Asia. In Australia, everything is much worse. Many animals were brought for business and for pleasure. Some of them became feral. Every slide has got a map showing the area of the introduced animal. I want to start with the dingo. The dingo isn't a wild dog, it's feral. These dogs appeared on the continent with the first people from Asia that are called Aborigines now. Naturally, some dingoes became feral. When the first Europeans arrived, dingoes lived in equilibrium with the environment. They hunted native species. Later they began hunting goats, rabbits, rats and mice. When dingoes cannot hunt their usual prey, they attack sheep, and farmers fight with the dingoes in many places. But fighting with dingoes is rather stupid, as they are the only natural predators of feral goats, cats and foxes. Perhaps the main problem is feral dogs. Because of them, the dingo, this rare breed, is disappearing. Feral cats are the most dangerous introduced mammals. They were brought to Australia as companions to the settlers, and many escaped. They were also released into the wild to control the rabbits. It didn't help, but it did have a huge increase of feral cats populations and huge decrease of native animal population. Nobody knows how many feral cats live in Australia, but they live almost everywhere and prey on all birds and many native mammals. Now about 80 species are endangered. Parakeets, wallabies, possums. Some species are extinct. The Paradise parrot, the Barwin bittern, the spectacled hare wallaby. Feral cats affect the native predators, the eastern crow, the wedge-tailed eagle, hawks and big reptiles, by eating their food sources. They also spread toxoplasmosis that is harmful and fatal for native mammals. Foxes were introduced into Australia for hunting. As you know, fox hunting used to be a very popular hobby in England, but it was prohibited some years ago. In Australia, the situation is different. But fox hunting can stop. Foxes from reproducing themselves so fast and having a great impact on Australia's nature, preying on ground nesting birds, mammals and reptiles. They endanger the greater bilby, the green turtle, the brindled nail-tail wallaby, many possums, the night parrot, etc. Of course, foxes compete with Australian native animals for food and habitat and spread dangerous diseases. Now the main hunters are farmers, but they don't hunt foxes riding horses. Farmers and professional hunters that are specially hard just shoot foxes because they prey on newborn lambs, kid goats and poultry. The first feral rabbits appeared in Tasmania. Luckily, there are quite few rabbits there. Now many people don't know that this great army of long-eared pests on the continent is the result of releasing 24 wild rabbits by Thomas Austin in Victoria. While living in England, he loves spending his free time on rabbit shooting. In Australia, Austin decided to revive his hobby. Soon many other farmers released their rabbits into the wild after him. In those days, many of them said, a few rabbits could do a little harm and could provide a touch of home. But this touch of home is very harmful. Rabbits cause land degradation. because they ringbark trees and eat young grass, bushes and trees. That's why the plant species don't grow back. They compete with native animals for habitats and food. The greater bilby, the brush-tailed bittern, and even a bird, goat's petrel, are now endangered. Shooting, trapping, and poisoning aren't effective in war with rabbits. The most modern method is biological, which is being tested now. There are some usual European and Asian birds in Australia, such as the house sparrow, the European greenfinch, the European goldfinch, the mute swan, the rock pigeon, and common or European starling, and the common myna. Thomas Austin, the man who released wild rabbits, ordered some sparrows from England and released them in his garden. Other sparrows arrived in Australia on ships. Other people missed European birds as much as Thomas Austin, so they got and released greenfinches and goldfinches. Somebody thought the white mute swans would look beautiful with native black swans, and that's right. Together they look fantastic. Nobody knows that stupid person who brought rock pigeons, but soon all towns and cities of Australia were full of them. All these birds cannot be called dangerous for Australian nature. Real disasters are the common or European starling and the common myna. The common or European starling was introduced into Melbourne and Sydney to fight with crop pests, insects which the starlings could eat. In the 1920s, starlings were widespread through Victoria, Queensland and New South Wales, but then they were recognized as pests. This bird has been classified as one of the top 100 worst introduced species in the world. The common starling threatens both Australian agriculture and biodiversity. They devastate orchards and fields, eating and spoiling grapes, peaches, olives, tomatoes, and digging up sound seeds. Just imagine what a flock of 50,000 starlings can do. The common starling is an aggressive bird that displaces other hollow nesting Australian birds, making many species of parrots, lorikeets, rosellas, and honey eaters endangered. The common or Indian myna was introduced into Australia to control insects in Melbourne's market garden. Now it threatens some of the Australian species. Ecologists found that the myna is threatening the laughing kookaburra, the crimson rosella, cockatoos, the grey fantail, the magpie lark, the woolly wagtail, and the silver eye. They cannot compete with mynas for nesting sites and food. Mynas eat not only insects, they often chase and kill small birds and animals such as the possums and feather-tailed gliders. On the other hand, some bird populations have increased since mynas riled the rose-breasted cockatoo, the eastern rosella, and the Australian king parrot, but it cannot be called positive. The cane toad is from South and Central America. It is an extremely active predator of insects and other small animals. The cane toads were introduced into Australia to control beetles in the sugar cane industry. Since then, cane toads have expanded through Australia's northern lands, and they are now moving westward at the speed of 60 km per year. The cane toad defends itself producing very strong poison. American predators avoid them. Australian predators aren't experienced, that's why they die rapidly after eating the toads. The cane toads have reduced the number of native predators, especially northern crows and large iguanas, crocodiles and snakes often die too. Adult cane toads compete with small native animals for shelter. For example, cane toads ruin the nest of ground nesting birds. They prey on small Australian turtles, tortoises, lizards, and frogs. The good news: is Australian predators have got more experienced, and now they avoid cane toads. Australian ecologists are working at the problem of saving small native birds and animals. There are many hoofed animals, both domestic and feral, in Australia, and all of them affect Australia's nature as it had never met them before. The first fleet arrived and brought cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses. Later, water buffaloes, camels, donkeys, and deer were brought. Their hooves are hard and crush native plants and can't recover soon. They break trees and eat their leaves. It means land degradation. They compete with native animals for food and habitat. Their dun nearly killed the nature of continent 60 years ago. Then 20 different species of dung beetles from Africa saved Australia. Perhaps they are the only useful introduced animals here. In London, you can see the monument to dung beetles. Now I want to describe the main hoofed animals that became feral. Pigs were introduced into Australia with the arrival of European settlers. When these animals escaped, they quickly got feral. The agricultural impact of feral pigs include land predation, crop and sugarcane damage, water polluting, disease spread, erosion. They eat different native animals, small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, birds and their eggs. They affect the biodiversity of vegetation and compete for food resources with native species. In some places, they eat rare and endangered species. For example, the white-billed frog, the orange-billed frog, and the corroboree frog. Australia has the largest wild population of camels. They occupy the deserts. They were used for riding and supplying materials and goods to road buildings, mines, and settlements in deserts. The feral animal population increased after the 1920s, when all of the railroads and motorways were built and most camels were released. Camels endanger the main desert trees, like a plum bush, the wattlers, the native apricot, and others. This threatens many native animals, especially the crest-tailed mulgara. Many water places are sacred sites to Aboriginal people, and when camels damage and pollute them is culturally significant. Hunting, exporting, and using camels in the tourist industry help to control them. Goats arrived in Australia with the first fleet, as they were small, ate different plants, and provided milk and meat. They were ideal for the first European settlers. Sailors also released goats onto many islands for emergency food. Feral goats are considered one of Australia's worst feral animals. They remove grass from hills, kill trees and bushes by eating leaves and bark. In fact, feral goats and rabbits have made the Phillip Island hibiscus nearly extinct. This hibiscus grows only on Phillip Island, near Melbourne. The rare yellow-footed rock wallaby has nearly become extinct because the feral goats compete with them for rock shelters and food. Where dingoes and wild dogs are present, feral goats generally do poorly. However, they often live in sheep grazing areas, where dingoes and wild dogs have been removed. Water buffaloes were brought to supply meat to the northern settlement. The settlements were left in 1949 and feral buffaloes spread across the rainforests of the Northern Territory, living in flat plains. The feral buffalo has become a real environmental disaster, as many native wetland animals and plants can't live in the muddied or salt polluted water. The freshwater crocodile and turtles, the barramundi, the magpie goose, and others have lost their habitat. Feral buffaloes eat lots of grass and other plants, leaving too little for native animals. Feral buffalo can carry diseases of cattle. Controlling feral buffaloes include exporting, shooting for meat industry and big game hunting. Feral horses and feral donkeys live mainly in central and northern Australia. The first horses arrived with the first fleet. Donkeys arrived to serve as pack animals. They were particularly useful in Western Australia and in the Northern Territory, where toxic plants affected horses. As machines replaced horses and donkeys, many of them became feral. Feral horses and donkeys are serious environmental pests. They damage water holes and introduced weeds. Feral horses and donkeys also compete for food and water with kangaroos and wallabies. This force native animals from their habitats and make native plants and animals locally extinct. Feral horses and donkeys also eat pasture grasses, destroy fences, spread diseases. Controlling them includes exporting and shooting for meat industry. Deer were introduced into Australia as game animals, but Australia isn't Europe, where there are lots more hunters. That's why so many deer occupy areas in Australia and cause environmental problems. Australia is now home to 6 species of deer. All of them are causing significant environmental damage. Where deer density is high, the variety of plant species is lower. Deer compete for food with kangaroos and wallabies. As hoofed mammals, deer spread diseases that affect cattle. I've told you about many introduced animals and their impact on Australia's nature. But if Australian ecologists find all of them, except dingoes dangerous, and the most dangerous are the feral cat, the fox, the pig, the starling, the myna, and the rabbit, Australian businessmen thinking of money have chosen the fox, the dingo, the feral pig, the starling, the myna, and the rabbit as the most dangerous. Business is ready to give money for seeking profits, and if it affects nature, don't worry. On the coat of arms of Australia you can see 4 Australian animals and wattle branches. But I want you to look at the kangaroo and the emu. These living symbols of Australia are pests in many places, and farmers can kill them. And not only emus and big kangaroos, but 18 more native animals, cockatoos, rosellas, lorikeets, possums. Does it mean the Australians aren't proud of symbols of their motherland? When I look at the coats of arms of Australia's states and territories, I think their creators joked. You can see introduced animals and plants, and they are near native animals. Yes, very beautiful pictures. But only if you don't know the real situation. Native species are getting extinct, and one of them, the Tasmanian wolf, has got extinct. In conclusion, I want you to look at the coat of arms of Australia again. The kangaroo and the emu, these living symbols, are in danger, even though there are lots of them in some places. What do they symbolize? Neither kangaroo nor emu can move back. Many Australians say these animals symbolize the motto of country, Advance Australia. But where is Australia advancing? Isn't time to stop and look round? Have the Australians forgotten the following English joke? In the city zoo the animals are kept in cages, for their own safety. I'm afraid it will sound a bit different soon, something like that. In the Australian zoos, the last native animals are kept in cages, for their own safety. There are too many questions, and every Australian and other people of our planet must answer.